Hi, my angels, and welcome back to another video. Now, today we are talking about one of the biggest things that I see people do when they're manifesting, especially when it comes to a specific person. And that is you say that you want the end, but you are still living from the middle. And the middle is where I see a lot of people get stuck. The middle is where you're overanalyzing, you're checking for movement, you're trying to force everything to make sense. You're in that state of what does that text mean? What does this silence mean? What does that delay mean? What does this emotion or thought or memory actually mean? And you're trying to find the answers and the why in everything. But speaking from experience, that is going to keep you stuck and it is honestly going to drive you crazy. So if you feel that you keep emotionally reacting to the middle, like it is your final story, you will keep recreating more middle. And I see this all the time. Now, people will say, well, okay, I know circumstances don't matter. I know I should just live in the end. I know I should persist. I know this doesn't mean anything, but, and then the second the 3D shows you something, you end up right back in that old identity. What if it's just not working? What if they don't want me? What if it's too late? What if someone else gets what I want before me? Those are the types of thought patterns that you're going to notice if you are living from the middle. And the problem is with focusing on the middle like that, the middle is always going to be a little unstable because the middle is your unfolding. So it can be a little messy because it's incomplete, it's confusing. Sometimes it even looks like the opposite. So if you keep looking to the middle for reassurance, you are always going to keep feeling more and more unstable because you're asking this unfinished scene to give you certainty, and it genuinely can't. So, this is why your manifestation can feel really hot and cold. And maybe one day you just feel really amazing. You feel really secure. You're getting all this movement, and you're like, okay, I know it's done. I know it's mine. You're looking at all these things like, yep, confirmation, confirmation. And then maybe the next day you see no movement, or maybe you get like a weird text, or you get silence. And suddenly you're spiraling and you're like, oh my God, it's happening again. And you freak out. Okay, why does this keep happening? But this is happening because you were in a state for a moment, but you have not yet allowed it to solidify as your identity just yet. Because you don't need external validation when you already have that inner knowing. So every time the middle tries to seduce you back into the old story, you return. Every time the 3D tries to convince you nothing is happening, you return. Anytime your nervous system feels like it's being set on fire, you return. And when you are returning, this does not mean that you never get triggered. It does not mean that you never feel anxious ever again. It does not mean that you just never notice the 3D because we have to interact with the 3D. It just means you are not persuaded into becoming this old version of yourself because of whatever it is showing you. That is the actual persistence. And as we know, persistence is loyalty. It's loyalty to the identity that you have selected. Now, I am someone who is very big on regulation, inner child work, healing work, whatever makes you feel good. But there's also a certain way that you have to go about this work, or you can easily fall into what I call the healing loop. Because once people start learning about manifestation, the nervous system work, this shadow work, inner child healing, it can almost start to feel like, okay, maybe there is just one more thing that I need to fix. Maybe there's another belief. Maybe there's another wound. Maybe I'm still blocked. Maybe I chose the wrong person. Maybe I have all this work I need to do and all of these different traumas that I have to heal. But when you enter into that type of mindset, it's suddenly you're not manifesting anymore. You're actually constantly trying to repair yourself. Now, I went through this phase really, really deeply. And there was a period of time where I was trying to heal every single thing in my life, every wound, every belief, every childhood pattern, every relationship trigger, every emotion or thought that I was freaked out by even having. And at first, it felt so empowering. I was like, oh, this is the one. This is the one. And then I'm going to get my manifestation. But then after a while, I started feeling almost resentful because I was doing all this work on myself and I knew that I was changing, I'm doing the work right. But I would look around and I would see people who weren't doing all of this work. They weren't doing the shadow work. They weren't analyzing their nervous system. They weren't unpacking every childhood memory. And from that perception of mine, they still had the love that I wanted or the opportunities that I wanted. And I remember just being so upset. Like, how is this fair? How are they getting it so easily? And I'm doing all of this work. And that is when I realized something very important. I was still very heavily operating from the identity that I had to earn what I wanted through hard work. I had just moved that identity into a spiritual container. So instead of hustling harder, I was healing harder. And instead of really proving my worth through this productivity phase, I was trying to prove my worth through self improvement. And if you're not careful, the healing world can keep you stuck in the middle because you really will start to believe I'll finally receive this when I'm healed enough. And I remember my sister one day snapped me out of this because she was like, you take everything so personally and you keep trying to fix yourself and heal all of these things, but you are genuinely driving yourself crazy, Bailey. And that's when it finally clicked what I was doing because you don't receive because you've perfectly repaired yourself. You receive because you shift identity. And sometimes the identity shift actually ends that healing loop for you because you stop treating yourself like a broken project and you start treating yourself like someone who is already worthy of love. You're already worthy of abundance. You're already worthy of being chosen right now in this moment. Now, with saying that as well, I also want to address kind of the relationship that you have with the 3D for a second, because a lot of people hear coaches say, ignore the 3D. And I've even said it, but sometimes you can take that to mean that you should avoid it completely or just pretend that these triggers aren't there, they're not active within you. But the 3D can actually become very helpful information if you know how to use it. So, for example, one of my biggest triggers used to be Instagram. We had a love hate relationship. Now, I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to see the following count go up. I didn't want to see who someone was interacting with. And I thought that my behaviors and my actions were the total cause of all of this. But because of that, my instinct was to avoid it completely. So I would deactivate Instagram, I would delete the app, I would just pretend that the trigger did not exist. But the trigger was very much still there. And eventually, I realized something. If something in the 3D triggers you that intensely, it is pointing to a belief or an identity that is still very active inside of you. So instead of fearing the 3D, I started using it as information, not at all for validation, but just for awareness for myself. Because let's say you check something like Instagram and you notice yourself spiraling. You start comparing yourself to someone, you start assuming the worst, you start creating this big grand story. I want you to just pause for a second because chances are this is not the first time that this pattern has happened. Maybe it happened in a past relationship or maybe with friends, maybe it happened at school, maybe it happened with coworkers. Maybe it happened when you were younger and you just felt really replaced or overlooked. Okay, it could be a number of things, but suddenly you realize in that moment something very important because this is where you stop blaming outside forces and you realize that it's genuinely not about this specific situation. Now, I noticed this myself with third parties because I would remove one third party and then another one would appear, and then another one, and then another one. And I would get rid of them, but then another one would come back in. And it looks like different people, but the emotion I felt was always the same because even if it was for different reasons or way different appearances, it was the same insecurity. It was the same comparison I was holding. It was that same fear of being replaced. And that is when I realized that the 3D was not attacking me or showing me that, this is just not your person. You need to just move on from that. So I was betraying what I wanted. The 3D was really just showing me that this is the identity that is still running the show, Bailey. And once you see that, the game changes completely, okay? Because now instead of reacting to every single new circumstance, you can just address that core root belief. And this shows up in so many ways because sometimes people cut someone off and they're very quick to say, that person was just so toxic. But then the next person that they meet does the same exact thing, and then the next one, and then the next one does it. And maybe it's different people or different ways that they say it or different circumstances, but it's still the same pattern. And you realize it's not random, it's just reflecting something deeper. Because the same thing can happen with friendships. Maybe you feel like, well, now that you don't have this person reflecting that, you notice your friends don't respect you, or your boss doesn't value you, or people always overlook you. So you might see different people come through and have different mirrors, but that same emotional pattern is going to continue. And that is how the 3D can become useful, because instead of asking, why are they doing this to me? You start asking, well, what identity is this reflecting back to me? And the moment that you see that, you can then consciously decide that is not who I am anymore. And that is when the identity can start shifting for you. And then, as you know, when the identity shifts, the mirror eventually shifts too. So don't be afraid of your 3D. Okay. Don't worship it either. You're just observing it. Okay. You're letting it just show you what beliefs are still very highly active within you so that you can then choose who you are. Now, I am very big on sometimes you just need an accountability partner, but you also need to use discernment in saying this, because having a manifestation buddy can be so beautiful and so beneficial, because having someone who understands consciousness and the law can feel so supportive. But sometimes when two people are both stuck in the middle, they accidentally keep each other there because you end up retelling the same story. You keep analyzing the same triggers with different circumstances or different people. You're asking what every little thing means, or you're jumping from technique to technique. Like, girl, maybe we just need new affirmations. Maybe we need a new coach. Maybe we need another course. Maybe we should try this technique. Maybe we should just switch SPs, right? And suddenly the journey just becomes this constant problem solving instead of the true embodiment. And I've also seen people that do have manifestation buddies also kind of fall into comparison loops, because even if you're just like looking at like different success stories or in groups alone, you're thinking, like, okay, well, maybe that person's more healed than me. Maybe they're doing it right. Maybe I need more coaching. Maybe I need to try out this new technique. Okay. But guidance can be very, very helpful, because a solid coach can absolutely help you see things that you cannot see on your own. But too many voices can also make you feel so confused, because every coach, myself included, has their own language, their own frameworks, their own approach. And if you keep consuming without stabilizing into your identity, you're going to feel like you're always missing something, or this was just genuinely the missing piece that I've been waiting for, and now I get my manifestation. Okay. But the reality is, you're not missing anything. You just need a clear direction, and you need a stable identity with a pure intention behind it. And this is why I always tell people, have an outlet, journal, talk to a coach, have one or two safe people, but you can't allow your whole manifestation journey to be about analyzing the middle, because the middle is always going to give you something to analyze. Now, that shift that you're looking for truly happens when you decide, I'm not going to keep searching for what's wrong with me. I'm going to decide who I am, and I'm going to start living from that, because healing is not linear. And I learned that the hard way, because you're always going to be growing and improving throughout your life, but you don't have to search for problems to fix. I promise you, things will naturally come up for you. And when you do, you're now going to have the tools to be able to shift them. Because what I've learned is healing is really just about letting go, it's not adding more work. And that's why it can feel overwhelming, because your awareness is going to be stuck in this loophole. So if you feel stuck right now, I want you to just ask yourself honestly, am I living from the end, or am I emotionally living from the middle? Because the middle is always going to be noisy and very nerve wracking. But the end, when you think of it, it's so peaceful, it's settled, it's solid. The end is truly where your power is. And the more that you practice returning there, the more it stops being this state that you're visiting and it really becomes the true identity that you live in. Now, sometimes we get so caught up in what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow that we forget where our power actually is. Now, there is a saying that I absolutely love, and it's always just a good reset for me to just check myself, which is yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That is why it is called the present moment. So come back here, come back to the version of you who already knows, because when you're fully present and you're fully honest with yourself, you're not stuck in the past and you're not anxious about the future. You are simply being the person who already has exactly what they want, and that is how it becomes very natural and effortless with you. Okay, so I know this has resonated with you guys, and I want you to comment down below, I'm done living from the middle, okay? Because you're already the version of you who is whole, perfect, complete, and you have exactly what you want. Okay, so I want to hop on here, give you a quick little catch up for your Friday night. Is it Friday? I don't even know what day of the week it is. It's been very busy, but I will see you guys in my next video.